If you watch the mainstream media today, you may almost be convinced Russia invading Ukraine is NATO or America's or even Trump's fault. And why not? Even Putin says it's NATO's fault. And Nazis, which if you watch said media, you know are swarming America right now. Why not Ukraine? In this video, I will show you why that is untrue, and lay out the real reasons Russia invaded Ukraine. Well, I'm going to debunk that NATO part. We all know that Nazis are sneaky bastards. They could be in South America, Antarctica, or even on the moon. Who am I to find out if they are in Ukraine? Okay, let's dive in. First, let's start by debunking this idea that NATO was about to establish a foothold on Russian borders, and that this sudden threat prompted the invasion. Well, in 2004, Estonia and Latvia joined. They share a large border with Russia, host NATO bases and weapon systems, and are, as the missile flies, a similar distance from Moscow. So to claim that Ukraine would foment this threat is to ignore that it already exists to the north, and Russia did nothing. Not to mention NATO is a defensive alliance. Yes, aimed at Russia, but with no interest in aggression, especially militarily, with Russia. In fact, it's against the interests of many NATO members altogether, because of the dependency on Russian oil and other material goods not easily replaced, like aluminum and wheat. Furthermore, Russia was betting on those dependencies to help it get away with the act. I don't think anyone expected USA sanctions to go as far as they did, or that NATO/EU would be as unified in enforcing them as they have been so far. The main reason being Europe's energy dependence. So why did Putin risk all this leverage to stop a problem that already exists in another place? Even if he wins in Ukraine, the NATO problem persists. The premise is laughable. Also, if his long-term goal is to push into NATO countries, then he's made a grave mistake in leaving himself wide open to them in a broader war. And this was before we saw how ineffective his forces have been in Ukraine. So the idea that Russia will continue on after Ukraine to invade NATO territory is also laughable. Not to mention the Russian BTG, or Battalion Tactical Group, is not designed for a high-tempo war with NATO. Instead, it was supposed to be augmented for urban warfare. Let's talk about the nukes. Will Russia use them? There's a saying in Russia that Putin himself has used. What good is the world without Russia? It is for that reason Russia has nukes, and why it also won't use them. I know this may be hard to believe, but Putin isn't crazy, and his invasion of Ukraine was done in an attempt to preserve Russia's future. So finally, let's talk about why he really did it. My favorite quote from Catherine the Great is, "The more a man knows, the more he forgives." But another powerful quote that's lesser known is, "If Russia is to survive, it must expand its borders." This is mainly because Russia is a vast open plains land with no mountains or oceans to protect it or hide behind. It is due to this fact that the Mongols were able to conquer and brutally govern over Russia, driving it into isolation and poverty, or that Germany was able to launch a lightning invasion that hoped to reach Moscow inside of 4 months, and almost did, getting so close as to see the lights of flashes from Moscow's anti-aircraft guns. The concept I'm addressing here is called strategic depth, and Russia has none to the west, aka Europe. So geographically speaking, in order to secure Russia's borders, it must expand to the edge of these plains and take control of natural barriers and the gateways between them. There are in fact 9 of these gateways, but for the purposes of our discussion, I will point out that Ukraine has 2 of them that let into their territory, one being south of the Carpathian Mountains towards Moldova, and the other being north, with the only other natural barrier between Europe and Russia being the Dnieper River that cuts Ukraine in half. I think we will find out that this river is very important to Russia as this conflict unfolds. But it also happens to be here that the first people to be called Rus, Kievan Rus to be specific, are found. They are the offspring of Swedish Vikings and the local Slavs, so in fact, Ukraine is the motherland of the motherland, birthplace of the Russian people. It was in fact the Mongols ruthlessly sacking the southern cities of the 13th century Kievan Rus that forced a migration north to Moscow, making it grow in dominance until Ivan's bloodline was eventually able to free and unify Russia by the mid-15th century. Now I know this little bit of history may bore you, but understand Putin is an avid scholar of history and knows that those gateways have been used at least 50 times to invade Russia, and also holds in his heart and mind that Ukraine is Russian. And understanding that is important. Also, Putin was working for the KGB 30 years ago when the dissolution of the Soviet Union made Ukraine an independent country. So historically speaking, Ukrainians are Russian, and their lands are key to defending Russia and providing it strategic depth. And Putin views it as his legacy to bring it back into the fold. He acted on his ambitions in Chechnya, often called his first invasion, where he quickly reincorporated Chechnya back to Russia, and Georgia in 2008 was also invaded. Coincidentally, Georgia had 2 breakaway provinces that Putin chose to recognize. Sound familiar? So Putin has shown clearly his goal to reunify the Russian Empire, of which Ukraine is traditionally a part. But this alone, of course, is not the reason. It merely establishes Putin's belief, not why now or why an invasion instead of using a puppet state protocol like in Belarus. Well, as for the puppet state, I think he was working on a hybrid strategy, part Belarusian, part Georgian, in that they used a lot of soft power to try to maintain Ukraine in their sphere of influence, but also acted militarily to secure more immediate needs after Viktor Yanukovych was forcibly removed from office for supporting a pro-Russian agenda. After Viktor came Petro Poroshenko, whose domestic policy promoted nationalism built around Ukrainian language and Ukrainian religion, going so far as to separate Ukrainian churches from their Moscow patriarchates, creating the autocephalous Orthodox Church of Ukraine. This Northern Revolution, plus suppression of the Russian culture, are what led to the separation of southern Ukrainian regions Donbass and Luhansk, who are traditionally heavily culturally Russian and speak Russian as a primary language. So we can see how the stage has been set, and we can see how Putin could politically think he may be able to convert the populace. But let's look a little deeper. Russia has a population of 145 million, and it's in decline. Russian military service is required for males, and as such, Russia's military will reduce in size as time progresses, and its overall population declines. Ukraine's largely culturally Russian population of 43 million starts to look like a good stimulus. And sure enough, we see Russia often only allowing civilians to escape along corridors to Russia or Crimea. And Crimea is the jewel of Ukraine. Its rich black soil is some of the best in the world, with cargo ports in the Black Sea. And just off its shores, vast oil and gas reserves have also been identified. Remember that Russian soft power relies heavily upon oil and gas exports, as well as wheat. This is why Russia couldn't wait and annex Crimea immediately. Today, Russian-controlled Gazprom is already extracting the resources from offshore. But in order to utilize the agricultural capability of Crimea, Putin must turn the water back on. And that's why I think control of the Dnieper River will prove to be a goal for Putin, at least in the south. But furthermore, I think Putin wanted to landlock Ukraine to fully consolidate the Black Sea resources. I'm not so sure he will be able to achieve that now. But if we look at the battle line, we can see the push to control the south of the Dnieper River. So in conclusion, Russia is a dying empire, seeking to revitalize through conquest, and Putin is an emperor looking for a legacy to gift his empire. Ukraine offers all he could hope for, a revitalized Russian populace, as well as the food and energy to sustain it, the doubling of his soft power, and yes, strategic depth, at least to the south. A grand legacy indeed, should he achieve it. What's up guys, my name is Crunk and I'm excited to introduce to you my brand new channel, No Man's Land Intel. Here I'm going to try to provide you with comprehensive and yet concise geopolitical content with a slant towards history and economics. If that sounds interesting to you, please subscribe to my channel and peruse my videos. Be sure to like and comment on the ones that you especially like and enjoy.